Danny Carter loved books more than anything else in the world. While other kids his age played video games or watched movies, Danny spent his time reading stories on his tablet. He had thousands of books saved on the small device, and he carried it with him everywhere he went. The 12-year-old boy lived on Colony 7 with his parents Jake and Marie Carter. His mom and dad worked long hours at the big machines that made the air breathable on their new planet. They were always tired when they came home, but they never worried about Danny. He was a good kid who stayed out of trouble and loved to read. Colony 7 was built near some old mining tunnels. The miners had dug deep into the ground many years ago, looking for valuable metals and crystals. When they found nothing useful, they left the tunnels empty and moved on to other places. Most people forgot about the tunnels, but Danny remembered them. Danny liked to explore the old tunnels when his parents were at work. He would take his tablet and a small flashlight and walk through the dark passages. The tunnels were quiet and peaceful, and Danny could read his books without anyone bothering him. He felt safe in the tunnels because no one else ever went there. On this day, Danny decided to go deeper into the tunnels than he had ever gone before. He had explored the main passages many times, but there was one tunnel that he had never fully investigated. It was narrow and seemed to go very deep into the ground. Every time he had looked at it before, something had made him turn back. But today felt different. Danny packed his tablet, flashlight, and a bottle of water in his backpack. He told his neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, that he was going for a walk. She was used to Danny going off by himself to read, so she just smiled and told him to be careful. The entrance to the mining tunnels was about a 20-minute walk from the colony buildings. Danny had made this trip so many times that he could find his way even with his eyes closed. The metal door that covered the tunnel entrance was old and rusty, but it still opened easily. Danny turned on his flashlight and stepped into the first tunnel. The air was cool and smelled like wet rocks. His footsteps echoed softly as he walked deeper into the ground. He passed all the familiar places where he had sat and read before. There was the wide chamber where he had finished reading about space, pirates. There was the long straight passage where he had discovered his love for dragon stories. After walking for about 15 minutes, Danny reached the narrow tunnel that he had never fully explored. He shined his flashlight into the darkness, but the light did not reach the end. The tunnel seemed to go on forever. Danny took a deep breath and stepped inside. This tunnel was different from the others. The walls were not smooth like the main passages. Instead, they were covered with strange bumps and formations that looked almost like crystals. As Danny walked deeper, he noticed that some of these formations were glowing with a soft purple light. The glow was so faint that he almost missed it at first. Danny turned off his flashlight to get a better look at the purple glow. The light was definitely coming from the crystal formations on the walls. It was beautiful and mysterious, unlike anything he had ever seen before. He took out his tablet and tried to take a picture, but the camera could not capture the strange light properly. The tunnel continued to slope downward, and the purple glow became brighter as Danny went deeper. He began to notice that the air was getting warmer. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, but soon he was sure that the temperature was rising. He took off his jacket and stuffed it into his backpack. After walking for another 10 minutes, Danny saw something that made him stop in his tracks. The walls of the tunnel were covered with marks that definitely did not look natural. They were not random scratches or cracks. They looked like symbols or writing, carved carefully into the stone. Danny had read many books about ancient civilizations and lost languages, but these symbols were unlike anything he had ever seen. They were curved and flowing, almost like artistic drawings. Some of them seemed to tell a story, with pictures that showed creatures and landscapes. Danny wished he could understand what they meant. He took out his tablet and carefully photographed each symbol. He planned to research them later, maybe ask Dr. Martinez at the colony if he knew anything about them. Dr. Martinez was the smartest person on Colony 7, and he might be able to help solve the mystery. The tunnel began to widen as Danny continued walking. The purple glow was now bright enough that he did not need his flashlight at all. The symbols on the walls became more complex and detailed. Some of them were arranged in patterns that looked almost like sentences or paragraphs. Danny rounded a corner and gasped. The tunnel opened into a huge underground chamber. The ceiling was so high that his flashlight beam could not reach it. The walls were covered with the same purple glowing crystals, but here they were much larger and brighter. The entire chamber was filled with soft purple light, but what really caught Danny's attention was what lay on the floor of the chamber. Scattered across the ground were large, oval-shaped objects that looked like giant eggs. Each one was about the size of a small car. There were dozens of them, maybe even 100. The eggs were not like chicken eggs or any other eggs Danny had ever seen. Their shells looked almost transparent, like colored glass. Through the shells, Danny could see dark shapes moving inside. Whatever was in those eggs was alive and growing. Danny walked carefully among the eggs, trying not to disturb anything. He had read enough science fiction books to know that he might have discovered something very important. These could be alien. Eggs from creatures that came from another planet. The thought was both exciting and terrifying as he moved closer to examine one of the eggs. Then he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It was a cracking noise, like glass breaking. He looked around frantically and saw that one of the nearby eggs was developing a long crack down its side. The cracking sound grew louder, and Danny saw more cracks appearing on the shell. Whatever was inside was trying to get out. Danny knew he should probably run, but his curiosity was stronger than his fear. He had read about this moment in so many books. This was first contact with an alien species. The egg split open with a sound like a window breaking. A liquid that looked like thick water poured out onto the chamber floor. And then something emerged from the broken shell that made Danny's heart stop beating. The creature that came out of the egg was unlike anything Danny had ever imagined. It was about the size of a large dog, but it looked like the dragons from his favorite fantasy books. Its skin was covered in scales that shimmered between purple and silver in the crystal light. It had 4 legs, 2 wings folded against its back, and a long tail with spikes at the end. But what scared Danny the most were the creature's eyes. They were large and intelligent, and they glowed with the same purple light as the crystals. The creature looked directly at Danny, and he could tell that it was studying him just as carefully as he was studying it. The baby dragon, for that was. The only word Danny could think of to describe it made a sound that was part growl and part chirp. It was not a threatening sound, but it was definitely a sound of curiosity. The creature tilted its head to one side and took a step toward Danny. That was when Danny heard more cracking sounds echoing through the chamber. He looked around and saw that other eggs were beginning to hatch. The sound of cracking eggs filled the chamber like breaking glass. Danny watched in amazement and terror as more baby dragons pushed their way out of their shells. Each one was different from the others, but they all had the same basic shape. Some had darker scales, others had lighter ones. Some were slightly bigger, others were smaller. But they all had those glowing purple eyes that seemed to look right through him. Within minutes, 5 baby dragons stood in the chamber with Danny. The liquid from their broken eggs made small pools on the stone floor. The dragons shook themselves, like wet dogs, sending drops of the strange liquid flying everywhere. Their scales caught the purple light from the crystals and sparkled like jewels. Danny stood perfectly still, afraid to move or make any sound. He had read many books about dangerous animals, and he knew that sudden movements could trigger an attack. These creatures might be babies, but they were already as big as large dogs. And they definitely looked like predators. The first dragon that had hatched was clearly the largest of the group. Danny decided to call him Rex in his mind, like the king of dinosaurs. Rex was almost 4 feet tall at the shoulder, and his scales were the darkest purple, almost black in some places. He seemed to be the leader of the small group Rex took. Another step toward Danny, and the boy could see that the creature was trying to decide what to do about this strange visitor. The dragon's throat began to glow with a soft orange light, like coals in a fireplace. Danny had read enough dragon stories to know what that meant. The creature was getting ready to breathe fire. The other 4 dragons noticed Rex's glowing throat and began to copy him. Soon all 5 baby dragons had glowing throats, and the temperature in the chamber began to rise. Danny could feel sweat starting to form on his forehead. He realized that he was in serious trouble. Danny looked toward the tunnel entrance, but Rex had moved to block his path. The dragon was not being aggressive, but he was definitely not going to let Danny leave. The other dragons spread out in a loose circle around the boy, cutting off any other escape routes. The dragons began to make sounds that were like a mix of growling and chirping. They were definitely communicating with each other, though Danny could not understand what they were saying. Their glowing throats became brighter, and Danny could feel waves of heat washing over him. In that moment of fear, Danny's mind went to all the adventure books he had read. Heroes in stories always found clever ways to escape from dangerous situations. They used their brains instead of trying to fight creatures that were stronger than them. But what could a 12-year-old boy do against 5 alien dragons? Then, Danny remembered something from one of his favorite books. It was a story about a princess who tamed a wild dragon by singing to it. The dragon in the story had been soothed by the sound of the human voice, and had become the princess's friend instead of her enemy. Danny did not know how to sing very well, but he knew how to read out loud. His teachers had always said he had a nice reading voice. Maybe, just maybe, the sound of his voice might calm these creatures down. Very slowly, Danny reached into his backpack and pulled out his tablet. The dragons watched his every movement, but they did not attack. Danny sat down cross-legged on the stone floor, just like he did when he read at home. He hoped that sitting down would make him seem less threatening to the dragons. Danny turned on his tablet and scrolled through his book collection. He needed to find something that would be interesting to read out loud. He decided on one of his favorite adventure stories about a brave knight who went on a quest to save his kingdom from a terrible monster. Danny cleared his throat and began to read. His voice echoed in the large chamber, bouncing off the crystal-covered walls. At first, his voice shook with fear, but as he continued reading, he began to feel more confident. The effect on the dragons was immediate and surprising. As soon as Danny started reading, all 5 creatures stopped growling. The glow in their throats began to fade, and the temperature in the chamber started to return to normal. The dragons tilted their heads to one side, like dogs listening to an interesting sound. Rex was the first to sit down. He folded his legs under him and lowered his great head until he was at Danny's eye level. The other dragons quickly followed his example, arranging themselves in a rough circle around the reading boy. Danny continued to read, describing the knight's journey through a dark forest filled with dangerous creatures. The dragons seemed fascinated by every word. Their purple eyes never left Danny's face, and occasionally one of them would make a soft rumbling sound that seemed almost like purring. When Danny reached an exciting part of the story where the knight faced a giant wolf, dragons leaned forward slightly. When he described a peaceful village where the knight rested, the dragons relaxed and settled more comfortably on the stone floor. Danny began to realize that these creatures were not just listening to the sound of his voice. They seemed to actually understand the story he was reading. That was impossible, of course. How could alien creatures understand human language? But their reactions were too perfect to be coincidence. After reading for about an hour, Danny's throat began to feel dry. He paused to take a drink from his water bottle. As soon as he stopped reading, Rex made a sound that was clearly a question. The dragon's expression, as much as Danny could read it, seemed to be asking why the story had stopped. Danny smiled despite his fear. These creatures actually wanted him to keep reading. He opened his mouth to continue the story, but before he could speak, something amazing happened. Rex closed his glowing eyes and made a series of complex sounds. The sounds were not random growls or chirps. They had rhythm and pattern, almost like music or poetry. The other dragons listened carefully, and when Rex finished, they made approving rumbles. Then Danny felt something incredible happen inside his head. Images began to appear in his mind, like watching a movie. He saw a world very different from Colony 7 or Earth. The sky was purple instead of blue, and there were 3 moons hanging in the air. Strange plants grew everywhere, with leaves that glowed like the crystals in this chamber. In the images, Danny saw adult dragons flying through the purple sky. They were much larger than the babies in front of him, with wings that could block out the light of the suns. The adult dragons were gathering in groups, and they were making the same musical sounds that Rex had just made. Danny realized that Rex was telling him a story, just as he had been telling stories to the dragons. But instead of using words, the baby dragon was using some kind of telepathy to share images and emotions directly with Danny's mind. The story that Rex told was sad and beautiful. Danny saw the adult dragons becoming sick with some kind of disease. He felt their sadness as they realized they were dying. He watched as they carefully prepared eggs for a long journey through space, hoping that their children would find a new home on a distant world. When the images stopped, Danny understood that these 5 baby dragons were alone in the universe. Their parents and all the other adult dragons were gone. They had hatched in this chamber with no one to teach them about their own culture or history. Rex looked at Danny with those intelligent purple eyes, and the boy could see a question in them. The dragon was asking if Danny would be their teacher, their source of stories and knowledge. Danny looked around at the 5 baby dragons sitting patiently around him. They were no longer the terrifying predators he had first encountered. They were orphans, lost and alone on a strange world, looking for someone to help them understand their place in the universe. Danny smiled and opened his tablet again. He had thousands of stories to share, and it looked like he had found the perfect audience. He began to read the next chapter of the night's adventure, and the dragons settled in to listen. Danny had been reading to the dragons for 3 hours, and something wonderful was happening. Each time he finished a story, one of the dragons would share their own images with him. It was like trading stories, except the dragons used pictures and feelings instead of words. The second dragon, who Danny called Luna because of her silver scales, showed him images of dragon families flying together in perfect formations. The third dragon, Spike, shared pictures of dragons building incredible cities from crystal and metal. The fourth dragon, Shadow, showed him memories of dragon children playing games that looked like flying dances. The smallest dragon, who Danny named Ember because of her bright orange eyes, shared images of dragons creating beautiful art with their fire breath. Danny began to understand that dragons were not just fierce predators. They were intelligent beings with their own culture, art, and traditions. They had families and cities and games, just like humans did. But all of that was gone now, destroyed by the sickness that had killed the adult dragons. As the hours passed, Danny noticed that the dragons were learning from the stories he read. When he read about knights being brave, the dragons sat up straighter and puffed out their chests. When he read about friends helping each other, the dragons moved closer together. When he read about heroes being kind to others, the dragons made gentle rumbling sounds. But the most amazing thing was that the dragons were starting to understand human words. At first, they just listened to the sound of Danny's voice. But now, when he said words like brave or friend or adventure, the dragons would make specific sounds back to him. They were learning to speak. Danny realized that these baby dragons were incredibly smart. They were learning human language faster than any human child could learn a new language. Their brains were built to absorb stories and information, just like sponges absorbing water. Rex was the fastest learner of all. After listening to Danny read for several hours, Rex tried to make sounds that resembled human words. His first word was story, which came out sounding like story. Danny was so excited that he jumped up and cheered, which made all 5 dragons jump and flap their wings in surprise. Danny laughed and sat back down. "Sorry," he said. "I was just happy that you said your first word." Rex tilted his head and made the sound again. "Story?" "Yes," Danny said. "Story. You want more stories?" The other dragons began trying to make sounds too. Luna managed to say something that sounded like more. Spike made a sound like friend. Shadow said Danny in a way that sounded like Dane. Ember made a sound that might have been good. Danny felt tears in his eyes. These amazing creatures were learning to communicate with him. They were becoming his friends, just like the characters in his favorite books. But as the day went on, Danny began to worry about other things. He had been gone from the colony for many hours. His parents would be home from work soon, and they would wonder where he was. Mrs. Henderson might tell them that he had gone for a walk, but they would expect him to be back by dinner time. Danny also realized that he was getting hungry and thirsty. He had finished his water bottle hours ago, and he had not brought any food with him. The dragons did not seem to need food or water yet, but Danny was just a human boy with human needs. Rex seemed to sense Danny's worry. The big dragon made questioning sounds and showed Danny images of concern. In the pictures, Danny could see himself looking tired and worried. "I'm okay," Danny said, "but I need to go home soon. My parents will be worried about me." Rex shared an image of Danny leaving the chamber, and Danny could feel the dragon's sadness. All 5 dragons made unhappy sounds when they realized that their new friend might leave them alone. "I'll come back," Danny promised. "I have thousands more stories to read to you, but I need to go home for food and water, and I need to let my parents know that I'm safe." The dragons did not seem to understand all of Danny's words, but they could feel his emotions through their telepathic connection. They knew that he was not abandoning them. He was just a different kind of creature with different needs. Rex stood up and walked over to one of the glowing crystals on the wall. He breathed a small puff of orange fire onto the crystal, and it began to glow brighter. Then he walked to another crystal and did the same thing. Soon, the entire chamber was brighter than it had been before. Rex showed Danny an image of the boy returning to the chamber. In the picture, the bright crystals would help Danny find his way back to the right place. "Thank you," Danny said. "That's very smart." Rex made a sound that was clearly meant to be welcome, though it came out as welcome. Danny packed his tablet back into his backpack and stood up. All 5 dragons stood up too, and they followed him toward the tunnel entrance. Danny was worried that they might try to stop him from leaving, but instead they seemed to be escorting him, like friends walking another friend to the door. At the entrance to the tunnel, Danny turned back to look at the dragons. They were all watching him with their glowing purple eyes, and he could feel their emotions. They were sad to see him go, but they trusted him to return. "I'll be back tomorrow," Danny said. "I promise. And I'll bring more stories." Rex stepped forward and very gently touched Danny's shoulder with his nose. The touch was warm and friendly, not scary at all. Danny reached out and touched Rex's snout, feeling the smooth scales under his fingers. "Goodbye, friends," Danny said. All 5 dragons made sounds that were meant to be goodbye, though they came out as goodbye. Danny turned and walked into the tunnel. Behind him, he could hear the dragons making soft rumbling sounds, like a sad song, but he could also feel their hope through the telepathic connection. They knew he would return. The walk back to the surface seemed much shorter than the walk down. Danny was excited about his discovery, but he was also worried. How could he explain to his parents where he had been? How could he tell them about the dragons without sounding crazy? Danny decided that he would not tell anyone about the dragons yet. He needed to think about this more carefully. The dragons were just babies, and they were alone and vulnerable. If the wrong people found out about them, the dragons might be hurt or taken away. But Danny also knew that he could not keep this secret forever. The dragons were growing quickly, and they would need more space and food soon. They would need help from other humans eventually. For now, though, Danny would keep the secret. He would be the dragons' friend and teacher. He would read them stories and help them learn about the world. And maybe, when the time was right, he would find a way to introduce them to other humans safely. As Danny emerged from the tunnel entrance, he saw the sun setting over Colony 7. The buildings looked small and ordinary compared to the amazing crystal chamber he had just left. But this was his home, and the dragon's chamber was becoming a second home. Danny walked back toward the colony, his mind full of plans. He would bring more books tomorrow, and maybe some food and water. He would teach the dragons more human words, and they would teach him more about their own culture and history. Danny smiled as he thought about all the stories he had yet to share with his new friends. This was going to be the greatest adventure of his life. Danny arrived home just as his parents were sitting down for dinner. Jake and Marie Carter looked tired from their long day at the terraforming station, but they smiled when they saw their son. "There you are," Marie said. Mrs. Henderson said, "You went for a walk. Did you have a good day reading?" Danny nodded and tried to act normal. "Yes, I found a really quiet place to read. I got through 3 whole books." This was true, even though Danny had read the books out loud to 5 baby dragons instead of reading them silently to himself. He was glad he did not have to lie to his parents. During dinner, Danny's mind kept drifting back to the crystal chamber. He wondered what the dragons were doing right now. Were they sleeping? Were they exploring the chamber? Were they missing the stories he had been reading to them? After dinner, Danny went to his room and started planning for the next day. He looked through his tablet and picked out some new stories that he thought the dragons would enjoy. He also packed some extra food and water in his backpack. The dragons had not seemed hungry, but Danny thought he should bring some food just in case. That night, Danny had dreams filled with purple crystals and flying dragons. In his dreams, he was flying alongside Rex and the others, soaring through the purple sky of their home world. When he woke up, he felt sad that it had only been a dream. The next morning, Danny told his parents that he was going for another long walk to read. They trusted him to be safe, so they just reminded him to be back before dinner. Danny practically ran to the tunnel entrance. He was excited to see his new friends and continue teaching them about human stories. But when he reached the crystal chamber, he found a surprise waiting for him. The dragons had grown overnight. They were noticeably larger than they had been the day before. Rex was now almost 5 feet tall at the shoulder, and the others were not far behind. Their scales looked brighter and more colorful, and their eyes glowed with more intelligence than before. But the biggest surprise was that they had been busy while Danny was gone. The chamber looked different. The dragons had moved some of the empty eggshells to create a more organized space. They had also done something to the crystals on the walls, making them glow in different patterns. Rex saw Danny first and made a sound that was clearly meant to be Danny. The word came out much clearer than it had the day before. Dan why? All 5 dragons rushed over to greet him, making happy sounds and gently touching him with their noses. Danny could feel their joy through the telepathic connection. They had missed him as much as he had missed them. "Hello, friends," Danny said. "You've all grown so much." Luna made a sound that was meant to be big. Spike said something that sounded like strong. Shadow and Ember both tried to say happy at the same time. Danny laughed and sat down in his usual spot. The dragons arranged themselves around him, but he noticed that they sat a little farther away than before. They seemed to understand that they were getting bigger and might accidentally hurt him if they got too close. Danny pulled out his tablet and began reading a new story. This one was about a group of friends who went on a journey to save their village from a terrible drought. The dragons listened carefully, and Danny could see them reacting to different parts of the story. When he described the friends working together to overcome obstacles, the dragons made approving sounds. When he read about them being brave in the face of danger, the dragons sat up straighter. When he described the friends caring for each other, the dragons made gentle rumbling sounds. After the first story, Rex shared a new memory with Danny. This time, the images were different from before. Rex showed Danny pictures of the adult dragons working together to build the spaceships that had carried the eggs to different worlds. In the images, Danny could see hundreds of adult dragons using their fire breath to shape metal and crystal. They worked with perfect coordination, like a well-trained team. Each dragon knew exactly what to do, and they never got in each other's way. But the most important thing Danny saw in the images was that the adult dragons were always teaching the young dragons. Every task, every job, every moment was a chance for the older dragons to pass on their knowledge to the younger ones. Danny realized that this was what he was doing with these 5 baby dragons. He was not just reading them stories for entertainment. He was teaching them about life, about friendship, about being brave and kind and helpful. He was doing the job that their parents should have done. The thought made Danny feel proud and scared at the same time. These dragons were depending on him to teach them everything they needed to know about being good individuals. That was a big responsibility for a 12-year-old boy. As the days passed, Danny fell into a routine. Every morning after breakfast, he would go to the crystal chamber. He would spend the entire day reading stories to the dragons and learning about their culture through the images they shared with him. The dragons continued to grow quickly. Within a week, Rex was 6 feet tall, and the others were close behind. Their language skills improved every day. They could now speak in simple sentences, and they understood most of what Danny said to them. But more importantly, they were learning the lessons from the stories Danny read. When he read about heroes helping people in need, the dragons would talk about how they wanted to help others too. When he read about friends being loyal to each other, the dragons would promise to always be loyal to Danny and to each other. Danny also began teaching them about human society. He explained how humans lived in families and communities. He told them about schools and jobs and governments. He described human art and music and science. The dragons were fascinated by human culture. They asked many questions about why humans did things in certain ways. They were especially interested in the idea of different types of jobs. On their home world, all dragons had done similar work. The idea that humans could choose to be teachers or doctors or farmers or artists was amazing to them. Luna became particularly interested in human art. She would create beautiful patterns with her fire breath, burning designs into the stone walls of the chamber. Spike was fascinated by human technology and asked many questions about how machines worked. Shadow loved stories about human music and tried to sing along when Danny read poems. Ember was most interested in stories about human families and wanted to know all about how human children grew up. Rex, as the leader, was interested in everything. He asked questions about human laws and government. He wanted to understand how humans solved problems and made decisions as a group. But as the dragons grew larger and smarter, Danny began to face new problems. The dragons were eating now, and they had big appetites. They could catch and eat the small animals that lived in the deeper parts of the tunnel system. But Danny worried that they might run out of food. The dragons were also getting restless. They wanted to explore beyond the crystal chamber, but Danny was afraid of what might happen if someone saw them. The tunnels connected to the surface in several places, and colonists sometimes used them for storage or exploration. Most importantly, Danny was having trouble keeping his secret from his parents. They had started asking more questions about where he spent his days. His mother had noticed that he was always tired when he came home, and his father had commented that Danny seemed distracted during family dinners. Danny knew that he would have to tell someone about the dragon soon, but he was terrified of what might happen if he told the wrong person. Would the dragons be taken away and studied like laboratory animals? Would they be seen as dangerous threats that needed to be destroyed? One evening, as Danny walked home from another day with the dragons, he made a decision. He would tell Dr. Martinez about the dragons. Dr. Martinez was a scientist, but he was also a kind man who loved learning about new things. If anyone could help Danny figure out what to do, it would be Dr. Martinez. Danny just hoped he was making the right choice. Danny found Dr. Martinez in his laboratory the next morning. The scientist was studying soil samples from different parts of Colony 7, trying to understand how the terraforming process was changing the planet's environment. "Danny," Dr. Martinez said with a smile, "what brings you here so early? Shouldn't you be off reading somewhere?" Danny took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been planning for all night. "Dr. Martinez, I need to tell you something very important. But you have to promise to listen to the whole story before you do anything." Dr. Martinez saw the serious expression on Danny's face and put down his equipment. "Of course, Danny. What's wrong?" Danny told Dr. Martinez everything. He described finding the crystal chamber, the hatching eggs, and his first terrifying encounter with the baby dragons. He explained how reading stories had calmed them down, and how they had learned to communicate with him. Dr. Martinez listened without interrupting, though his eyes grew wider with each part of Danny's story. When Danny finished, the scientist sat quietly for a long moment. "Danny," Dr. Martinez said finally, "this is the most incredible thing I've ever heard. If what you're telling me is true, you've made first contact with an alien species. Do you understand how amazing that is?" "I understand," Danny said, "but I'm also scared. The dragons trust me, and I don't want anything bad to happen to them. They're not dangerous. They're just children, like me, trying to learn about the world." Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "I believe you, Danny, and I think you're right too. Be careful about who you tell. But these dragons are going to keep growing, and eventually other people will discover them. We need to think about how to handle this properly. Will you come meet them?" Danny asked. "I think if they meet you while I'm there, they won't be scared, and you can see for yourself that they're not dangerous." Dr. Martinez agreed, and together they gathered some basic scientific equipment. Dr. Martinez wanted to record the meeting and take some measurements, but he promised to be very careful not to frighten the dragons. The walk to the crystal chamber felt different with Dr. Martinez beside him. Danny was nervous about how the dragons would react to meeting another human. They had only ever known Danny, and they might see Dr. Martinez as a threat. When they reached the chamber, Danny called out softly, "Rex, Luna, Spike, Shadow, Ember. I'm back, and I brought a friend." The 5 dragons emerged from the depths of the chamber, and Danny heard Dr. Martinez gasp behind him. The dragons were now almost 7 feet tall, Truly magnificent creatures with scales that shimmered in the crystal light. Rex stepped forward cautiously, his purple eyes fixed on Dr. Martinez. The dragon's throat began to glow slightly, ready to defend Danny if necessary. "It's okay," Danny said quickly. "This is Dr. Martinez. He's a friend. He wants to help us." Danny shared calming thoughts through his telepathic connection with the dragons, and they relaxed slightly. Rex approached Dr. Martinez slowly, studying the older human with intelligent eyes. "Hello, Rex," Dr. Martinez said softly. "Danny has told me wonderful things about you and your friends." Rex tilted his head and made a sound that was clearly meant to be, "Hello." The word came out perfectly clear, much clearer than Danny had ever heard him speak. Before Dr. Martinez was amazed. "Danny, their language development is incredible. They're learning faster than any creature I've ever studied." Over the next few hours, Dr. Martinez observed the dragons and took careful notes. He watched Danny read to them and saw how they responded to different types of stories. He observed their telepathic communication and their artistic abilities. Most importantly, he saw how the dragons treated Danny. They were gentle and protective, always careful not to hurt him with their size and strength. They clearly loved him like a brother or a beloved teacher. "Danny," Dr. Martinez said as they prepared to leave, "these dragons are remarkable. They're not just intelligent. They're wise and kind. You've done an amazing job teaching them." "What happens now?" Danny asked. "Now we need to tell the colony leadership," Dr. Martinez said, "but we'll do it carefully. We'll explain that these are peaceful, intelligent beings who want to be friends with humans." That evening, Dr. Martinez called a meeting with Helen Brooks, a colony administrator, and several other important colonists. Danny was invited to tell his story again, this time to the people who made decisions for Colony 7. Some of the colonists were frightened when they heard about the dragons. They worried that the creatures might be dangerous or that more dragons might arrive from space. But Dr. Martinez and Danny explained how peaceful and friendly the dragons were. "These dragons are orphans," Danny explained. "They lost their families and their home world. All they want is a chance to live peacefully and learn about our world. They don't want to hurt anyone." Helen Brooks made the final decision. "If Dr. Martinez believes these creatures are safe, and if Danny has been working with them successfully, then I think we should try to build a friendship with them. But we need to be very careful and take things slowly." The next day, a small group of colonists went to meet the dragons. Danny led the way, with Dr. Martinez, Helen Brooks, and 2 security officers following behind. The security officers were there just in case, but they had promised not to bring any weapons. The dragons were nervous about meeting so many new humans at once, but they trusted Danny. Rex spoke for the group, using the human words he had learned. "We friends," Rex said slowly. "We humans. We want peace." Helen Brooks was amazed by Rex's intelligence and sincerity. "We want peace too," she said. "We want to be friends with you and your family." Over the following weeks, a remarkable partnership developed between the humans and dragons of Colony 7. The dragons proved to be incredibly helpful. They could use their fire breath to help with construction projects, melting and shaping metal with perfect precision. Their strength allowed them to move heavy objects that would have required machines. But more than their physical abilities, the dragons brought knowledge. Through their telepathic sharing, they taught humans about advanced crystal technology and energy manipulation. They showed the colonists how to grow the purple crystals, which could store and channel energy more efficiently than any human. Technology. The dragons also helped improve the terraforming process. They could sense changes in the planet's environment that human instruments could not detect. They helped the colonists understand how to work with the planet's natural systems instead of fighting against them. In return, The humans taught the dragons about human culture, science, and technology. The dragons were fascinated by human music and art. They learned to read human books on their own and became voracious readers. Luna became the colony's first dragon artist, creating beautiful crystal sculptures with her fire breath. Spike worked with human engineers to design new types of machines. Shadow learned to compose music that combined dragon songs with human melodies. Ember became a teacher, helping human children learn about dragon culture. Rex became the official ambassador between the two species. He worked with Helen Brooks to create laws and agreements that would allow humans and dragons to live together peacefully. Danny continued to be special to all the dragons, but now he was not their only human friend. The entire colony had embraced the dragons as family members. 6 months later, when the next group of dragon eggs arrived from space, they were welcomed with celebration instead of fear. The first 5 dragons helped teach the new babies, passing on both dragon traditions and the human knowledge they had learned. Danny, now 13 years old, had become the youngest ambassador in galactic history. He traveled to other human colonies, helping them prepare for their own dragon arrivals. He always carried his tablet full of stories, ready to share the magic of reading with any dragon who needed to hear about heroes, friendship, and the power of kindness. The boy who had faced down the fiercest alien dragons with nothing but stories had proven that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a good book and the courage to share it with others.